Hello and welcome to another brand new episode of What the FinTech, the podcast from the team behind FinTech Futures and the Banking Technology magazine. My name is Paul Hindle, editor at FinTech Futures, and for this episode, we're joined by Janine Hirt, CEO of Innovate Finance. Janine, welcome to the show.
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for having me here.
Excellent. It's great to have you here. Just to get started, we'd like to quickly let us know a bit more about yourself then and Innovate Finance.
Yeah, absolutely. So I run Innovate Finance. We are the industry body for UK FinTech, and we represent the next generation of entrepreneurs and technologists that are looking to transform financial services for the better. We bring together early stage companies, the unicorns, also your large institutional players within FS, and really try and create a more positive financial sector.
Sounds great. And again, thank you so much for coming along to the show today. It's great to have you here. So on the show this week, we'll be taking a look at the current state of affairs with global fintech investment following the publication of Innovate Finance's H1 2024 FinTech Investment Landscape report. We'll dive into some of the trends and statistics highlighted in the report and which areas are seeing the most funding activity. And we'll also discuss what the future might hold for the UK's fintech scene in particular under the new Labour government. That's all to come shortly, but as always, we'll open with our news and number segments. This is where our guest has gone out and found a news story featuring an interesting number to discuss and get us started. So, Janine, what have you brought along for us today?
Yes. So I think the number I would bring to the table would be £328 billion, because we at Innovate Finance believe that this is the number and the amount that can be contributed by UK fintech to the UK economy if we see the support necessary to help this sector over the next 5 years from the current government.
Excellent. Yes. I mean, that's obviously a huge number. I mean, can you give us some more details then? Because obviously you've launched your FinTech Plan for government. How do you think that goal can be achieved? What changes in particular are needed to drive that economic boost?
Yeah, so our FinTech Plan for government has three big ambitions that we think this government should be able to deliver on while working with industry and the regulators. The first is we believe that the UK should be the world's first smart data economy. That means looking at progressing areas such as open banking through to open finance. We also, as our second ambition, think that the UK should be the most secure place in the world for consumers and businesses to use digital finance. And that means we have to be tackling fraud in an effective and an appropriate and a holistic manner. So looking at things like app fraud, looking at bringing the large techs accountable as well, and also ensuring that we are educating consumers about using finance online. And then the third ambition is about making the UK the world leader in adopting new technology in finance by embracing new technologies, but also, again, about educating consumers and equipping consumers with the essential skills to use digital finance as well. So if we deliver on these three components, we see that the sector, UK fintech, can bring in $328 billion and contribute that to the economy. Now, I know a lot of people ask, how do you break that down? We've actually broken it down by building a smart data economy would contribute $215 billion to UK GDP over 5 years. The introduction of a digital pound would contribute $75 billion to the UK GDP over 5 years. Increasing financial education would contribute $32 billion to UK economy over 5 years. And tackling payments fraud would contribute $6 billion to the UK economy over 5 years.
Amazing. What's the reaction been like to that report then so far? It seems like obviously this benefits everybody, really. I mean, what kind of policies, actions in particular are you expecting or hoping from the government then to help achieve these?
Yeah, so we've had really fantastic engagement and response from government and from industry and also from regulators. I think it's important to say that this actually developed out of a FinTech manifesto we started nearly a year ago on, which we also brought around the entire UK to get feedback and input from different FinTechs all over the United Kingdom. And we also worked with government and we worked with regulators to ensure that we were creating policies and recommendations that are deliverable on. So we see that these three ambitions and these three goals are very feasible if we all work together to help drive them forward. There are a few things that are on the inbox that are relatively urgent for this government coming up. I think areas like app fraud, which we know an implementation date is scheduled for October, making sure we're approaching that holistically so that we don't harm consumers or harm the sector is really critical. Looking at ensuring that we're progressing national payments vision and having third-party providers' voice in there and the fintech voice and the disruptor voice is really important. And those also looking at things like ensuring we have continued proactive regulation. So buy now, pay later regulation, we want that to come in as soon as possible, but we want it to also be effective and correct. And looking at how the UK is approaching new technologies such as AI and making sure that communication across industry and government regulators continues, because that at the end of the day is one of the reasons we feel the UK is such a global leader when it comes to financial innovation.
Excellent, excellent. And how optimistic are you, I guess, going forward then? So, I mean, obviously you've set the next kind of 5 years. Are you optimistic that target can be hit?
We really are. And I have to say, we've had very strong engagement with all parties of government, I should say. So now the current opposition, we've also had really great engagement over the years with the current government. And there is definitely a desire and a need to support this sector. You hear all about their ambitions with regards to growth in the UK. And fintech is the natural driver for growth here in the UK. So we very much stand at the ready to help support this government in hitting those ambitions for consumers everywhere.
Moving on then to obviously that H1 2024 FinTech Investment Landscape report then. So that revealed that the global FinTech investment fell by 19% in H1 2024 compared to H2 2023. I mean, what were some of the key takeaways from that report then, and which statistics really stood out for you?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think we all would probably agree it's been a pretty difficult few years. And I would say that it's not just been for fintech, it's been for VC investment overall. And that data point, I think, is very important to underline because fintech has just been decreasing in the same level of investment as other VC investment. It's been in tandem with other VC investment. The story and the numbers around fintech is actually not as bad as people sometimes take away. So we did see a 30% decrease in terms of UK fintech investment, but actually we're still at higher levels of investment than we were before the COVID pandemic. And the UK is also still second in the world only to the United States in terms of investment in fintech. And we are ahead of all of the rest of Europe combined. So taking into consideration that it is a difficult market for all VC investment, UK fintech has really shown its resilience, it's really shown its strength, and I would say it's also really shown its maturity over the years in being able to still bring in very significant amounts of funding and investment from both UK investors, but also from global investors as well. Some of the areas that I think are really interesting to look at is the shift in investment moving from later stage to earlier stage. So the bulk of investment we saw in H1 this year was seed or Series A. And that is not just a UK trend, it's a global trend. I think 81% of all investment in H1 this year was for seed and Series A. So it is important that when we have these conversations about industry and about policy and about governments, we look to support both those later stage companies like the unicorns, and we have something called a unicorn council at Innovate Finance, but we also look to ensure we're supporting the early stage companies and the entrepreneurs who are driving so much of this growth and future innovation as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, looking at the UK in particular, I guess obviously you mentioned a couple of stats there, accounting for 12.7% of the global fintech market as well with the funding in the UK. I mean, what is it that you would say that makes the UK such a strong market then for fintech investment?
Yeah, another great question. I think there's a couple of different components. So first and foremost, we have the most incredible ecosystem of entrepreneurs and of innovators here. And that's a word I want to take out of jail as well. I'm not sure if I mentioned that, but the ecosystem. I think we've got just some of the most incredible entrepreneurs. And they come from both domestic, but also all over the world. We are a hub for that type of innovative thinking, thanks in part to having a great university system, but also we have great support from government, and we always have had, and we continue to have. And that is really important when we look at policies that help innovation to thrive. We also have outstanding talent at all levels. And that, again, is thanks to the university system, but also the schooling system, the education system, and our ability to attract talent and grow talent both domestically and from abroad as well. We also have historically had very proactive regulators when it comes to innovation that have always focused on ensuring the consumer's benefit, but also recognizing that at the end of the day, it is consumers that benefit from innovation if it's done in financial services in the right way. We want to make sure that proactivity in regulation continues here in the UK, and that's across all of the regulators, and we're really working hard to see that. And also, quite simply, we are a global leader when it comes to financial services and tech. And bringing those two things together help to strengthen the UK's position when it comes to fintech more broadly.
So there's been a lot of talk, obviously, that fintech investment has been a lot tougher to come by over the last few years as compared to the peaks of 2021, 2022. What would you say the general sentiment is like then in the space right now when it comes to fintech investments in particular? Is it low at the moment, or is there a sense that we're kind of on the way back up now?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball, because if I did, I'd be able to answer it more easily. But I would say at Innovate Finance, based on some of the research that we've done around the investment landscape, speaking with our members, speaking with the fintechs, I'm not confident enough to say we've reached the bottom. But what I would say is that we are hopeful that by 2025, we will start to see an uptick again in investment in fintech, both in the UK and globally, to reach some of those prior levels. I do think there's been a maturity of the sector that would have happened also inevitably with or without a cost of living crisis, which we've seen in terms of mergers and acquisitions and just in terms of growth of companies as well. I would also say that with regards to those companies that are at the later stage, many are choosing to remain private for longer or choosing to hold off on IPOs, but that's not a UK only phenomenon. And I think it's really important when we talk about the LSE, they've actually been fantastic when we look at listings and when we look at fintechs. And it's something that we have to keep in mind is on a global basis, we're seeing a drop in that component. So those are a couple areas. The other thing I would mention is that when we look at the investment drop in fintech globally, because we have seen a 19% decrease on a global basis in fintech investment. This is a tough year, not just economically, but it's also a really big year on the political level. So I think it is one of the biggest years for democratic elections that we've ever seen, more democratic elections happening around the world than ever before. And that will all have an impact when it comes to investment and to VC investment specifically.
Excellent. And obviously you mentioned there as well, the early stage deals accounting for 81% of all deals globally. Are these seen as the better long-term options now compared to those kind of mega rounds that we used to see back in like 2021, 22?
I think they both have strengths, right? And I think it's important to back to this conversation about the ecosystem. I think it is important to look both at the early stage companies and the unicorns, because obviously the growth is many ways coming from the unicorns, but the early stage companies will be our next set of unicorns. And so when you think about adding value to the economy on a whole, you need to look at the full cycle. And that means supporting those late stage companies as they look to exit or IPO, but also supporting those early stage companies because they will be the unicorns of the future. And it's important to think when we talk about the contribution to the economy, it's also around talent. So we have more than 76,500 individuals in the UK employed within the fintech ecosystem. And that will only continue to grow over the next 5 years.
Excellent. And I mean, looking back at the UK then, what would you say are some of the key areas of development that UK fintechs are focused on at the moment, and which technologies or sectors are seeing the most traction at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, payments is always huge for the UK. And I think we're also at a really pivotal point right now. So initiatives like the National Payments Vision, we've been working with industry and with government to try and flesh this out. That has to move forward. And also areas like open banking have to move forward as well. And it's particularly important when you look at our international competitiveness in the UK as a fintech hub, because other regions around the world are pushing ahead. So it's important that we continue to have that momentum on those areas. And also when you think about new technologies, I mean, AI obviously is really important. The interesting thing is fintechs, of course, have been using AI for years. So I think it's really an interesting discussion, an interesting conversation when you look at use cases, when you bring Gen AI into the conversation as well. How do we collaborate and work with government and the regulators to make sure that we are regulating new technology in a way that doesn't kill innovation, because that will do no one any good, right? That will harm consumers and it will harm the country as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, do you have an answer for that? I guess how do we collaborate with the regulators there?
Well, I think making sure the lines of communication are open and also looking at what the data shows. So, as an example of this, we talk a lot about authorized push payment fraud and the deadline that's coming up in October and the reimbursement threshold. So, looking at 415K threshold will actually only cover 0.27% more than the 99.7% that would be covered by an 85K threshold. But when you look at the impact that a 415K threshold will have on the industry in terms of reducing competition, it's detrimental. So looking at the data, looking at the numbers, also ensuring actually that we have the right talent and skills in place across industry and regulators and government. So looking potentially at a secondee program or a side of talent exchange program is something that we've also been advocating for. And we've also put that in our FinTech Plan for government. And we work with the City of London as well in their recent report that also highlights that.
Great. So I guess on the flip side of one of my previous questions, then, I mean, which areas in the UK kind of fintech scene do you think aren't getting enough attention at the moment that you think maybe should be seeing some more activity?
Well, I'll answer that in two answers. So I think one of the areas we need to do a lot more on is around driving diversity in fintech. The percentage of investment that went into female-founded or female-led fintechs in H1 of this year was 7%. So it's a drop from the 10% that we've seen last year. But it's not just about gender equality as well and gender parity. We have to look at all types of diversity. So racial diversity, ethnic diversity, LGBTQIA plus diversity, socio-diversity, neurodiversity. Fintech is at the cutting edge and the forefront of financial services. So we should be the place where we are driving this diversity and also reflecting the consumers that we serve. So I think that is an area we need to see some change. Part of that needs to come from the top. So looking at ensuring that we have more diverse VCs and decision makers at VCs is really important. So I would call out diversity as an area we need to pay more attention to and really progress. The other arenas I would say are that there are some underrepresented verticals that are really exciting, at least to me, and I think to a lot of others, such as RegTech. I think there is a huge opportunity for the fintechs in the UK on the RegTech side, so on compliance and on other arenas of RegTech, to really take a global leadership role in setting the agenda for that specific arena of financial innovation.
Yeah, and just building on what you said there, I mean, the Innovate Finance FinTech Investment Report highlights a decline in financing female-led fintechs in the UK, finding that of the 2 billion raised in total in the country, only 7% of which, so that's around 136 million, was invested in female-led companies, which was down from the 10% recorded over 2023. I mean, what do you think needs to change in the industry then? Obviously, you mentioned a couple of points there, but what else needs to change, do you think, to help close this investment gap?
Yeah, I think we need to be able to give diverse founders the support that they need to get in front of investors, but we also need to make sure that the investors reflect the founders as well. So making sure that we've got the diversity at the investor level is really important, but also making sure that we're supporting diverse founders, whether it's through mentorship programs, through networking opportunities. And I also would say, going back to the point about data, making sure that VCs show their diversity, that, the numbers around diversity, making sure they have metrics attached to their investments as well, are all going to go a long way to helping us close that gap.
Yeah, we've been talking obviously a lot about UK fintech investments. I mean, despite being second only to the US in terms of fintech investment, then over H1 2024 with $2 billion invested in UK companies, that was still a 37% decrease from the previous 6 months. I mean, with global competition for investment increasing, do you think the UK can maintain and strengthen its position on the global stage?
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. I love to, but also hate this number. Just to point out that France has dropped out of the top 10. So when we look at our European counterparties as well, I think we definitely have a way forward. We're ahead of all of Europe combined. We have the leadership opportunity. We just can't stand still. So we need to keep up this momentum. And also looking on a global basis at where we are in political situations, there is a huge appetite for entrepreneurs and fintechs to start and scale and grow here in the UK. We just need to ensure that we're pushing ahead with some of these initiatives that I mentioned earlier and that we don't stay stagnant.
Excellent. Sounds great. And I guess just to finish things off here then, I mean, what's next for Innovate Finance as well moving forward?
Yes, well, we are really excited for what's to come for fintech. We want to continue helping to drive investment. We're working very closely with the City of London, the previous Lord Mayor, and the upcoming Mayor on areas like the Mansion House Compact, making sure that is realized. We have launched earlier this year our Unicorn Council, which is also advocating for specific policies to help larger fintechs stay here and ultimately list here. We're working closely with the LSE on that as well. And then in October, on the 10th of October, we have our Innovation for Growth Forum coming up, which is very specifically looking at how fintechs can contribute to this £328 billion addition of growth to the economy. So we'll be doing a deep dive into the role of fintech in driving growth, in driving financial inclusion, and driving financial wellness, and supporting the government. And we're looking forward to government engagement across that agenda as well.
Thanks again, Janine, for chatting with us today. To close out the podcast, we have on our infamous FinTech jails. This is where we ask for an industry term, buzzword, or trend that you've seen or heard enough of. Or, of course, you can advocate to free one of the previously incarcerated terms. And I know you touched on something a little bit earlier about the jail, but what would be your selection for this week?
Well, I'm going to take ecosystem out of jail for all the reasons, because I think it really, I know people have an issue with the word, but I think it's really important because it is an ecosystem. There are so many different components, so many different players. The other one I'm going to pull out of jail is digital identity. Because when we're looking at the international competitiveness of the UK, I think we must have a conversation around digital identity and what that could mean for the UK and our approach to it here. And that is really to ensure, to be honest, greater financial inclusion, greater financial wellness as well. So having that discussion is critical. And then the word I would probably put into jail would be co-opetition. Mostly just because we are collaborating, we are competing, and we are cooperating, but not putting it together into one word. I think I would put into the jail. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So I guess that's two out and one in then. So that works quite well for us. It is getting quite full, the jail now, actually. So that's probably a good system to be moving ahead with. I mean, competition is an interesting one. Is that something you see a lot with, obviously, the viewpoint you have as kind of an independent industry body overlooking the fintech environment? Is that something that you see kind of coming back in now? Or?
Yeah, and I mean, we used it a lot when I've been with Innovate Finance since basically around 6 months after the launch. So with the initial leadership team. And so I took over as CEO 3 years ago, but I've seen a lot of fluctuation and change and maturity happen in the market. And we use that term quite a bit in the early stages. But at this point in time, the sector is so mature that, of course, you're going to see cooperation and collaboration. And of course, you are going to see competition, because ultimately that is what drives any sector moving forward. And you will have fintechs that cater very specifically on a B2B basis to the large institutions. And then you still have a number of fintechs that are disrupting financial services and offering new products, new services, and new ways of looking at things, right? So thinking about SME lending, 60% of all SME lending in the UK is being done by fintech today. That's a huge change. That's been very much down to disruption and competition. And then if you look at the B2B drive of fintechs, there are so many organizations like Thought Machine, for example, that are working to help the larger institutions and the legacy systems actually update and provide better experience at reduced cost. So I would say it's almost a natural progression of an industry, and that's where we're at.
Excellent. Yeah, sounds good. And completely agree with your points there. And I'm more than happy to send competition into the jail this week. Digital identity has been in the jail since season 2, so it's been in there for a while now. And do you think that space has evolved enough now that it deserves its chance to get out there into the conversation again?
I think we need to have a conversation about it, right? If you think about what other regions around the world are doing, so looking at Estonia, but also Singapore, looking at the Netherlands, looking at so many different regions, India, of course, that are just jumping forward because they are either implementing these systems or at least having a conversation around what a digital identity could look like, or a form of digital identity could look like. I mean, Europe more broadly is looking at this as well. I think we have to start having the conversation at deeper levels.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, from a customer perspective, I mean, there's often discussions around trust when it comes to digital identities. I mean, what would you say the current sentiment is like among customers at the moment then towards that? And is that trust there, and is that trust growing?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. And I think this also boils down to where we are in terms of educating consumers, because digital identity could have the opportunity to drive even greater trust in the system, in the same way that open banking has, and has already had a really positive impact and an increase in consumers. But we need to be working with government. So industry needs to be working with government and with regulators in order to educate consumers and make sure that any system is rolled out in a way that still protects the consumers as well. And that is where I think we need to start having these conversations, or continue having these conversations around digital ID or some form of, say, financial passporting that could bring in that security as well.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I think you've made a really great case for that there. So I'm happy to let this one out of jail this week. Happy to let Ecosystem out as well as a 2-for-1, like say, and send co-opetition.
More fight back, but yeah.
Yeah, no worries. So like I said, I mean, it's getting very full in there now. So like I said, the 2-for-1 model might be quite good moving forward. But Janine, thank you so much again for joining us for the podcast today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's been great to be on here. Thanks.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thanks, of course, to Janine for joining me. As for FinTech Futures, you can find us online at fintechfutures.com, on X at FinTech Futures, and of course on LinkedIn. If you like this podcast and our other episodes, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcasting service to get notified about future episodes. Thanks as well to Arama for editing this podcast. You can check them out at arama.tv. As always, thank you very much for your support, and we'll see you soon for another episode of What the FinTech. But until then, goodbye.